I want you to guess a number before we start. Somewhere between $100,000 and $2 million. That's the range we're working in today, because I'm about to rank 10 pieces of clothing from one man's closet, from least valuable to most, and by the time we hit number 1, you're going to understand why collectors treat these garments the same way art dealers treat a lost Picasso. This is the wardrobe of Michael Jackson, appraised at over $100 million combined, and today we're not just looking at it. We're ranking it. 10 pieces. 1 countdown. And a final reveal that even hardcore fans usually don't know the full story behind. Stick around until the very end, because the last item on this list isn't even something you can buy, and once you hear why, you'll understand why it might be worth more than everything else on this list combined. Let's get into it. Quick disclaimer before we start climbing this list. Rank here doesn't just mean auction price. It means a mix of rarity, engineering difficulty, historical weight, and how impossible each piece would be to ever recreate today. Some of the cheapest items on paper are actually the hardest to replace, and you'll see exactly what I mean starting right now, at the very bottom of the list. And stay with me through all 10, because the order genuinely isn't what most people expect once you start weighing rarity and craftsmanship against a simple auction number. Before we get into the official 10, a few pieces almost made the cut and deserve a quick mention, because leaving them out completely would be criminal. A tattered, deliberately shredded shirt worn during a devastating 1996 performance about environmental collapse didn't make the ranking, not because it lacks value, but because it was never built to survive. It was designed to fall apart on stage, on purpose, as the performance built to its emotional peak, and pieces engineered for destruction are notoriously difficult for appraisers to price, since so few of them stay intact afterward. A plain institutional prison uniform worn for a Spike Lee-directed video also missed the cut, even though it might be the single most emotionally loaded costume he ever wore. No crystals, no gold, nothing to sell at auction for a huge number. Just plain fabric used as a direct political statement about incarceration and injustice. And a full-body werewolf transformation, built by a legendary Hollywood creature artist for the opening of his most famous short film, sits in an odd category of its own. It's arguably one of the boldest costume decisions of his entire career, burying the most recognizable face on the planet under monster prosthetics. But because it was built primarily as makeup and practical effects rather than couture, it lives in a completely different collector's market than everything else on this list. Keep those 3 in mind. We'll come back to what they represent at the very end. Now, on to the official ranking. Number 10. A pair of shoes nobody was ever supposed to notice. Plain, worn, unpolished black loafers. On paper, they sound like the least remarkable item in this entire list. No crystals. No gold. No embroidery. But these loafers solved a problem that could have ended Jackson's career overnight. He refused to let anyone shine them, and it wasn't superstition. A polished sole is a slippery sole, and a slippery sole on a stage full of spins, drops, and choreographed falls is an injury waiting to happen. He told his designer bluntly that a single twisted ankle could shut down an entire touring company's income overnight. So the worn leather stayed worn, deliberately, permanently, because grip mattered more than shine. When a pair of futuristic boots built for a film project failed him mid-shoot because he physically couldn't dance in them, his team didn't force him to adapt. They cut the soles out of those sleek sci-fi boots and hid his trusted, broken-in loafers inside the shell instead. It's the least glamorous item on this list, and arguably the most important one, because without it, half of this countdown wouldn't exist. Think about that for a moment. A $2 million leather jacket means absolutely nothing if the man wearing it slips and falls during the very first spin of the night. Every other piece on this list only gets to exist because this unglamorous pair of shoes was quietly doing its job underneath everything else. Number 9. A short black jacket and a tilted fedora from one of his final music videos, released in 2001, where he stepped back into the sharp-suited, dim-lit club aesthetic he'd first explored more than a decade earlier. It doesn't carry the eye-popping auction numbers of some of the pieces we're about to get to, but its value lives somewhere else entirely: cultural closure. This was the last major costume built for a Jackson music video before his death, and watching it back now hits differently. There's no desperation to prove anything in the way he wears it. It's confident, settled, almost nostalgic, A performer revisiting a silhouette that had once defined one of his biggest visual triumphs, but wearing it like a victory lap instead of a comeback attempt. Archivists value it as much for what it represents as for the stitching itself. Sometimes the story a costume tells matters more than the materials it's made from, and this one closes a chapter nobody knew, at the time, was closing for good. There's a particular kind of weight that gets attached to the last version of anything a legendary artist creates, whether it's a final album, a final tour, or in this case, a final costume built specifically for a music video. Collectors describe a strange feeling looking at pieces like this one, knowing that whoever built it had no idea it would end up being the closing statement on an entire visual era. Number 8. A stiff, ivory and silver commander's uniform built in 1986 for a 3D film project that most casual fans have completely forgotten existed. It was produced with genuinely massive Hollywood names attached behind the camera, and the costume itself was a fusion of science fiction armor and old-world military tailoring, plated across the chest and shoulders to create one unbroken silhouette from collar to boot. This uniform rarely comes up in conversations about his most iconic looks, which is exactly why serious collectors quietly rank it higher in importance than casual fans would expect. It was the prototype. The blueprint. Nearly every heavily structured, crystal-encrusted stage jacket that came in the years after it can trace its DNA back to this one theme park costume that most people only vaguely remember. Rarity plus historical significance is a combination that drives value in ways flashier pieces sometimes can't match. And here's the twist most people miss. Because this project barely circulated outside of theme parks, very few authentic pieces from it survived at all, which means the handful that did are treated like archaeological finds rather than ordinary memorabilia. Scarcity alone can turn something forgotten into something priceless, and this uniform is proof of exactly that. Number 7. A dark tailored jacket worn during a tour finale, torn apart, thrown to the floor, and stomped on as part of the choreography every single night, for months. This wasn't theatrical miming. The destruction was completely real. Zippers snapped. Seams split. And after every performance, Jackson would simply tell his designer the hardware needed fixing before the next show. That designer would spend late nights repairing mangled zippers by hand so the jacket looked flawless again by the following evening, an invisible cycle of destruction and restoration that ran for the entire length of the tour. When one of these jackets eventually reached auction, it sold for close to $300,000, nearly triple its original asking estimate. That number alone should tell you something. Even a jacket that was quite literally destroyed on purpose, night after night, only became more valuable because of the damage, not despite it. Scars, in this closet, are a selling point. There's something almost poetic about that when you sit with it. A jacket engineered to be ripped apart, thrown to the ground, and stomped on as part of a nightly ritual ends up, decades later, fetching a price higher than most people's homes, precisely because the wear and tear proves it was real. Nobody was faking anything on that stage. The zippers breaking under real stress, the fabric taking real damage, all of it becomes part of the value once the performance is long over and the jacket is the only witness left. Number 6. The rigid, mold gold bodysuit built for a 1995 album campaign, paired with circular mirrored sunglasses that erased his eyes completely from view. This piece wasn't designed to move gracefully across a stage like most of the others on this list. It was designed to look cast in metal, frozen, monumental, more statue than performer. The accompanying promotional film unveiled an enormous golden statue of Jackson to a roaring crowd, and the bodysuit blurred the line between man and monument in a way no other pop star of that era attempted. Appraisers value it not just for the labor involved in molding it precisely to his frame, but for what it represents conceptually. An artist deciding, in real time, to dress himself as history before history had finished being written. That kind of conceptual ambition doesn't come cheap. Consider what it actually takes to build a suit that has to look like solid, gleaming metal under studio lighting while still being flexible enough for a human being to stand in for hours during a photo shoot. It's a strange kind of engineering, sitting somewhere between costume design and sculpture, and almost nobody else in music has ever attempted anything quite like it since. Number 5. Flowing, gold-trimmed robes built for a 1992 short film set inside an ancient Egyptian court, worn during a sand dance sequence so smooth it looked like the floor had no friction at all. Where most of the pieces on this list rely on rigid structure, sharp shoulders, and heavy embroidery to project power, these robes did the opposite. They were built entirely around movement, drape, and flow. That structural rarity is exactly why they rank as high as they do. Costume archivists will tell you that stiff, ornamented jackets are common in his collection because they were his signature. Flowing garments built for a single, specific choreography are far rarer, which pushes their value up even without a headline-grabbing auction price attached to them. And there's a cultural weight here too that's easy to overlook. The films surrounding these robes brought together some of the most powerful black entertainers of that entire decade in a single frame, which means this costume isn't just a rare object, it's a rare object tied to a genuinely significant cultural moment, and those two things together are almost impossible to separate once you start pricing a piece like this. Number 4. The crisp white suit, blue shirt, and white fedora from a 1988 film, engineered from the inside to survive one of the most physically demanding illusions ever built into a music video. A forward lean so extreme it looked like gravity had simply stopped applying to him. That lean required specially engineered shoes bolted directly into the stage floor, and the suit had to be internally reinforced to handle that mechanism without a single visible seam giving away the trick. This is the piece that proves something important about how this entire closet should be judged. It has no crystals. No gold plating, no sequins, and yet it consistently ranks above heavily decorated pieces because of pure engineering difficulty. Anyone can sew rhinestones onto fabric with enough time and patience. Building a suit that hides a gravity-defying stage mechanism while still looking effortless on camera is a completely different skill, and it's rarer than people assume. Most people watching that lean for the first time assumed it was pure core strength and balance. It wasn't. It was a suit and a pair of shoes working together as a single hidden machine, and the fact that nobody in the audience ever noticed the trick is exactly why this costume belongs this high on the list. The best engineering, in this closet, was always the engineering nobody was supposed to see. Number 3. An illuminated stage jacket wired with more than 11,000 individual bulbs, requiring 3 engineers just to install the wiring and a dedicated technician operating a remote control system live during every single performance. Think about that for a second. This wasn't a costume department job. It was closer to a small electrical engineering project that happened to also need to survive 2 hours of non-stop choreography a night without a single bulb failing on camera. Pieces like this rank high not because of celebrity provenance alone, but because nothing else like it exists anywhere in the world of stage costuming. You cannot replace it. You cannot recreate it without the original blueprints and the original team, and both of those things are gone. Picture the coordination that took over 11,000 bulbs, all wired to survive sweat, movement, and impact, all controlled live in real time by someone standing off stage watching a performance unfold second by second, ready to react if a single circuit failed in front of thousands of people. That's not costume design anymore. That's live theatrical engineering, performed under pressure every single night of a tour. Number 2. And this is where the story gets personal. A short, cropped black jacket covered edge to edge in hand-sewn sequins, worn during a nationally televised anniversary special in 1983, the same night the moonwalk was introduced to the world for the very first time. Paired with a single crystal-covered glove and a tilted fedora, this jacket completed the exact silhouette that would define his entire solo identity for the next 3 decades. Here's the detail that pushes it to number 2 on this list instead of somewhere in the middle. It wasn't built by a professional costume house at all. His own mother sewed those sequins on by hand. No fashion label. No atelier. Just a mother with a needle and thread, dressing her son for a performance that would go on to change popular music forever. Auction houses can put a price on rarity and craftsmanship, but sentimental, historically pivotal pieces like this one tend to outperform even their own appraisals whenever they surface, because collectors aren't just buying fabric. They're buying the exact moment a global phenomenon was born. Think about how rare that combination actually is. Most historically significant costumes come from professional ateliers with teams of trained hands behind them. This one came from a kitchen table, or a couch, or wherever Katherine Jackson sat with a needle that night, stitching sequins onto her son's jacket with no idea that millions of people would spend the next 4 decades trying to imitate the exact silhouette she was quietly building by hand. And that brings us to number 1. A red and black leather jacket, built for a 1982 short film, its shoulders exaggerated and winged outward, a sharp black V cut down the chest to pull every eye downward across the frame. Only 2 of these jackets were ever produced for the entire production. Not 200. Not 20. 2. In 2011, one of those 2 original jackets sold at auction for $1.8 million, a figure that stunned even experienced collectors, because no music video costume in history had ever come anywhere close to that number before. It didn't stay confined to its original context either. It became a Halloween costume worn by millions of people who'd never even seen the full short film. It became a reference point sampled by fashion designers for decades afterward. It became a museum centerpiece displayed behind protective glass in exhibitions around the world. Very few garments in the entire history of popular music have achieved that level of saturation across so many different corners of culture simultaneously, and that combination of extreme rarity, cultural reach, and jaw-dropping auction history is exactly what earns it the top spot on this list. Compare it to the loafers we started with at number 10, and the gap almost doesn't make sense on paper. Both are pieces of clothing. Both were worn by the same man. But one was built to disappear into the background so nobody would ever question it, and the other was built specifically to become the single most photographed jacket in music video history. That's the entire spectrum this closet operates in, and almost no other performer's wardrobe spans that kind of range. So there's your countdown, 10 items, from a pair of unpolished loafers all the way up to a $1.8 million leather jacket. But here's the part almost nobody brings up when they talk about this closet, and it's worth sitting with for a second before we wrap this up. Every single piece on this list was built under the same 4 unbending rules his design team followed for 25 straight years. Fit, function, fun, and first. Fit meant every garment had to move like a second skin, flowing seamlessly with the choreography instead of fighting against it. Function meant safety came before spectacle, always, no matter how good an idea looked on paper. Fun left room for the childlike wonder and fairy-tale imagination that ran through nearly everything he wore. And first, the hardest rule of all, meant no design was ever allowed to repeat a previous success, no matter how much audiences had loved it the first time around. That last rule alone explains why this closet stayed unpredictable across 4 different decades, and why ranking these 10 pieces was genuinely difficult. There wasn't a formula being repeated here. Every single item had to earn its place from scratch. Remember those 3 honorable mentions from earlier, the shredded shirt, the prison uniform, the werewolf makeup? Look at them again through this lens. None of them repeat a previous idea either. Each one takes the exact same set of rules and points them somewhere completely different, toward grief, toward protest, toward pure horror movie transformation. That's not an accident. That's a design team being held to an almost impossible standard for 25 consecutive years, and somehow never running out of new ground to cover. There's also a rule that ran underneath all of it, one his designers have talked about openly over the years. If a man in the front row could afford to walk into a store and buy the exact same outfit, the whole illusion had already failed. That's why shin guards were plated in real 18-karat gold instead of cheaper costume metal. That's why armor pieces were custom mold rather than mass-produced. That's why some embroidery took hundreds of hours of hand-stitched labor to finish a single jacket. The goal was never to look relatable. It was to look aspirational, slightly unreal, permanently out of reach, and every item on this countdown was built with exactly that goal in mind, whether it was a $2 million leather jacket or a plain pair of loafers nobody was ever supposed to notice. It's a philosophy that runs almost opposite to how most modern celebrity fashion works today, where accessibility and relatability are often treated as selling points in themselves. This closet was built on the exact opposite instinct. The further out of reach something looked, the more powerful it became on stage. And that brings us to the detail most lists like this one leave out entirely, because it never went to auction and it never will. Tucked quietly inside the jacket Jackson was buried in is a small, hand-embroidered Tinkerbell, sewn in by the same designer responsible for some of the most valuable pieces on this list. It has no appraised value, no auction record, no public price tag of any kind, because it was never meant for a stage, a museum, or a collector's vault. It was a private gift, a A final quiet piece of magic hidden where no camera could ever find it, sewn in by hands that had spent 25 years building crowns out of raw metal and wiring thousands of bulbs into a single jacket, but this time working in complete silence for an audience of exactly nobody. In a closet built entirely around the idea of being seen, admired, and eventually sold for jaw-dropping sums, that one stitch was designed to do the opposite. It was made to stay hidden. And maybe that's the real number one on this list, the piece with the highest emotional value in the entire collection, worth infinitely more than any auction record could ever measure, because it was never for sale to begin with. If you had to guess before watching this, where would you have ranked the glove? Most people assume it takes the top spot automatically, purely because it's the most recognizable object in his entire wardrobe. But recognition and value aren't always the same thing, and that gap is exactly why this closet keeps surprising people who think they already know the full story. Auction houses have watched pieces they expected to sell modestly explode past every estimate, simply because the right buyer understood what they were actually looking at. $100 million sounds like an abstract number until you break it down piece by piece like this, and realize almost every single item on that list started out as nothing more than an idea sketched on paper by two designers determined never to repeat themselves. 25 years, thousands of individual garments, and a set of rules so strict that even the man wearing the clothes had to earn every new design from scratch. That's the real story hiding underneath the price tags. Not just what these clothes are worth today, but how impossibly hard it was to build a closet like this one in the first place, and why nobody has ever managed to build another one quite like it since. If you had to redo this list yourself, where would you put the glove? Where would the werewolf makeup land, or the prison uniform we mentioned earlier as an honorable mention? There's no single correct answer, and that's kind of the point of a closet this deep. 10 items barely scratch the surface of what's actually sitting in vaults and museums around the world right now, quietly appreciating in value every single year, waiting for the next auction to prove, once again, that this wasn't just clothing. And if you go back and re-watch any of the footage this list touched on, watch the hands, not just the face. Watch how deliberately every glove, every cuff, every collar gets used as part of the choreography itself, not as an afterthought stitched on at the last minute. That's the detail collectors keep coming back to, the reason this closet keeps climbing in value instead of fading into memory like almost everything else from that era. It was a 25-year argument about what a performer could look like, stitched, soldered, and sewn into existence one impossible piece at a time, and this countdown was really just 10 small windows into a much bigger, much stranger story than most people ever stop to consider.